In 1984, 4 nuns from the hillside convent of Santa Aurelia vanished without a trace as a dense fog swallowed the valley and the chapel bells rang their final note. The candlelight flickered against the stone walls, and the confessional door swung open to an empty pew. No bodies, no footprints, only silence thick enough to breathe. Decades later, in 2013, a weary priest reopened the long-sealed chapel. Beneath its floor he discovered something hidden, a confession, a relic, and a truth that the Vatican never intended to see daylight. Why did the Church allow this story to disappear? What really happened that night when prayer met the forest and never returned? For decades, believers whispered that God had turned his face away, that faith had been buried beneath sacred ground. By the end of this story, you'll walk that same passage, touch the rosary they left behind, and hear the voice that never reached morning. Welcome to Bible Stories and Mysteries. Like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. The last evening of their lives at Santa Aurelia began quietly. A cold mist had already descended from the ridge, rolling across the fields like a slow tide. The chapel bell tower vanished in it first, then the garden walls, then the orchard where the sisters kept their bees. Only the light from the small arched windows held against the grey, a thin gold heartbeat in the fog. Inside, Sister Elena was finishing her nightly task of trimming the candle wicks. She hummed softly under her breath, a melody without words that she had sung since her novitiate. The others moved around her in that peaceful rhythm known only to those who live by prayer. Sister Marta folded the altar linens with careful fingers, aligning the corners as if aligning her soul. Sister Agnes, the youngest, polished the chalice until her own reflection blurred into the metal glow, and Sister Lucia, restless and silent, stood at the chapel door, staring into the fog beyond the garden wall. The clock struck 9. Compline was over. The sisters would normally extinguish the candles and retire to their dormitory, but that night, none of them moved. A strange heaviness filled the air, as though the fog outside had seeped through the very stones. A knock sounded at the side gate. 3 times, slow and deliberate. Sister Elena frowned. "At this hour," she murmured. She went to the door with her lantern. Through the fog stood the caretaker, Arthur, his coat damp from the climb. He held a small basket of apples and a letter sealed with wax. "The priest in the valley sent this," he said, lowering his eyes. "Said it was important." Elena took it, thanked him, and watched him disappear back down the path. When she broke the seal, a smell of smoke rose from the parchment, faint but sharp. She read silently, lips pressed together. Then she whispered, "May God forgive us," and held the letter to the candle flame. The wax melted, the paper blackened, and she dropped the ashes into the font. "What was it?" asked Lucia. "Nothing that should be spoken," Elena replied. They knelt together, their 4 silhouettes bending like reeds in candlelight. Outside, the bell gave a single tremor, though no one had touched the rope. Sister Marta crossed herself. "The wind," she said. Though there was no wind, the air was still enough that the flames of the candles leaned one way, as if pulled by invisible breath. Agnes whispered a line from the Psalms, "Be still and know that I am God." Elena nodded. "Then we must be still." They sat in silence. From the direction of the chapel came the faint rustle of wood, like pews shifting under unseen weight. Lucia rose, hesitant. "There's someone inside," she said. Elena shook her head. "Only what we've brought with us." But Lucia went anyway, her candle shaking in her hand. She pushed open the chapel door. The scent of incense and cold stone met her like a wave. The altar candles still burned, though they should have died hours ago. In the confessional, the curtain moved, slowly, deliberately. She called out, "Father?" No reply. The curtain fell still. Lucia approached, heart thudding. She drew the curtain aside. The seat inside was empty, but the floor beneath it was disturbed. Dust smeared by knees, as if someone had knelt there moments before. In the corner lay a rosary, broken, its beads scattered like tiny black seeds across the stone. Behind her, the other 3 sisters entered quietly. Eleanor looked toward the altar. "We will pray," she said. They knelt together before the tabernacle, 4 voices whispering a litany lost to time. The fog thickened against the stained glass, dimming even the candlelight. Then the bells began to ring. At first, just one low tone, then another, faster, irregular, desperate. It was not a call to prayer, it was a cry. The sisters froze. Elena stood, eyes wide. "Who pulls them?" No one answered. The rope hung from the tower, swinging on its own. A sound followed, the slam of the outer gate, the scrape of feet across gravel, the echo of the door to the dormitory opening and closing. Then silence. When Arthur returned at dawn, the mist had lifted. The sun found the convent empty. 4 beds were unmade. 4 veils lay folded on the table beside the chapel door. The apples he had brought were still in their basket, untouched, gathering dew. He searched the grounds, the garden, the forest path. He found no footprints, no clothing, no sign of struggle. Only near the confessional did he notice the marks in the dust. 2 knees, a heel dragging backward. And there, beneath the bench, a single candle still burned. Arthur whispered, "They were praying when they left." He closed the chapel door and went down to the village, crossing himself as the bell gave one final shudder. 29 years after the fog took the sisters, the church reopened the doors of Santa Aurelia. The letter from the diocese was brief. Reinstate the parish, assess the property, and record any remaining archives. Father Gabriel Moretti arrived on a grey morning in early spring. He was 47, tall and tired in the way that only priests who have seen too much suffering can be. His collar was clean, his faith less so. Rome had sent him there for quiet work, restoration, they said. But silence was not always peace. The convent lay exactly as the reports had described. The paint peeled like skin from the walls, the windows clouded by dust. The bell tower leaned slightly east, its rope hanging in tatters. The air smelled of wax and damp stone, as if time itself had grown mold. Gabriel stepped into the chapel and stopped. The air pressed close, heavier than it should have been. The kind of silence that doesn't come from emptiness but from attention, like being watched. He knelt before the altar. "Lord," he whispered, "let this place remember mercy." The echo returned his words with a faint distortion, as though the stone itself was repeating them. He began the slow work of cleaning. Each day he swept, dusted, and repaired what could be saved. The days slipped into one another until the distinction between prayer and labor faded. He slept in the old rectory above the chapel, where the floorboards creaked in the night. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps below. One evening, as he closed the chapel for the night, a sound stopped him. A faint tapping behind the confessional. It came once, twice, then stopped. He stood still, breath held. The next night, it came again. He told himself it was the settling of old timber, the echo of mice, but the sound carried weight, rhythm, as if trying to form words. Sophia, a local woman who brought him bread each week, noticed his distraction. She was the granddaughter of the caretaker, Arthur. "My grandfather said the chapel speaks when the wind comes from the ridge," she told him. "That's when the bells used to ring." "The bells are broken," Gabriel said. "Then something else is ringing," she replied. That night, he dreamed of fog moving through the chapel aisles like smoke. The bells rang somewhere deep underground, muffled, distant. When he woke, his hands smelled faintly of candle wax, though he hadn't lit one. He decided to review the archives. Most of the old records were missing, but among the few remaining books he found a leather-bound parish ledger. Its final entries dated 1984. The last note, written in an unfamiliar hand, read, "The relic is safe. The silence grows." He stared at the phrase until the ink blurred. Relic. What relic? The next morning, while polishing the brass candlestick, he noticed a small seam near the confessional. The plaster there looked newer, smoother, as if replaced. He pressed it. It sounded hollow. He fetched a lantern, tapped along the wall, and found a hidden latch covered in dust. Something metallic glinted inside. He cleared it with his thumb and saw an old iron keyhole. In his drawer upstairs, he remembered the small box Sophia had brought, her grandfather's things. Inside lay a key, thin and crescent-shaped, tied to a brittle scrap of parchment that read, "Only Fondo." Back. He fit the key into the wall. It turned once, slowly, with a dry groan of rust. The plaster cracked and a panel shifted inward, exhaling a breath of stale air. A passage revealed itself, narrow, descending into the dark. The smell was thick and cool, a mingling of wax, incense, and earth. Gabriel hesitated. Then he lifted the lantern, drew a breath, and whispered, "When I am afraid, I will trust in you." The steps led down into silence. When his feet touched the cold floor of the chamber below, he felt the air change, dense, listening. On the wall ahead, the faint outline of a cross glimmered in soot. A table stood in the center covered in dust. Upon it, a folded linen tied with purple cord. He reached for it, and the flame of the lantern bent toward the cloth, as though drawn to breath. The air in the chamber moved like a slow breath. Father Gabriel lifted the linen carefully, the dust rising around it like incense. Underneath lay 4 small scapulars, perfectly aligned, each stitched with a single name in blue thread: Eleanor, Marta, Agnes, Lucia. Beside them, a book bound in cracked leather. He opened it. The ink had faded to the color of ash, but the handwriting remained strong. Deliberate, rounded, a woman's hand. The first line read, "If anyone finds this, forgive us. We did not go willingly." He turned the pages with care. The journal described the final months of the convent. It spoke of strange disturbances, candles extinguished without cause, windows rattling during silent prayer, and a voice that whispered from the confessional when no one was inside. Sister Eleanor had written, "We are told to keep watch over what was brought here, though it frightens the youngest among us. It burns when prayed near, as if the air itself resists." Gabriel paused. The pages carried the faint scent of lilies, though they were decades old. He continued reading. The sisters had received a small chest from Rome, delivered under secrecy. It contained a relic, a fragment of bone wrapped in gold cloth, said to be from an unnamed martyr. They were instructed to hide it until further notice, but peace left them soon after. "At night," Eleanor wrote, "the bells ring though the ropes are still. We hear a woman's voice reciting the Psalms backward. Sister Lucia dreams of fire. We wonder if what we guard is not holy but abandoned." The last entry was dated August 18, 1984. "We have hidden it beneath the place where confession meets absolution. May God forgive our fear." Gabriel closed the book and exhaled slowly. Beneath the table, one tile appeared newer than the others. He knelt, brushed away the dust, and found a small indentation. With the blade of his knife, he pried it open. A faint sigh escaped the earth. Beneath the tile lay a metal box, its edges engraved with the sign of a cross. The wax seal bore the imprint of a priest's ring, an unfamiliar insignia. He whispered a prayer, "Lord, protect me from false light," and broke the seal. Inside lay a fragment of bone, no longer than a finger joint, wrapped in gold cloth that shimmered even in the dim light. For a moment he thought he felt it pulse. The flame of the lantern flickered violently, then steadied. He lifted the relic, and a low hum filled the chamber, like distant bells heard underwater. Then, just as suddenly, silence, a movement behind him. He turned sharply, lantern trembling. The stairway was empty, yet the air seemed to press closer, as if the room had grown smaller. He placed the relic back into the box and stepped away. "Whatever holiness remains," he murmured, "it is not meant for me." When he climbed the stairs back to the chapel, the light felt strange. The candles he had left burning were shorter, nearly melted through. Hours had passed, or minutes. He couldn't tell. He locked the door behind him and sat in the first pew. His heart beat loud in his ears. From the altar came a sound, faint but clear, the soft creak of the confessional door moving on its own. He rose, hesitant, approached. The door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see the seat inside, shadowed and empty. Yet the air smelled of incense, fresh, as if someone had just finished a prayer. On the small shelf inside, he found a piece of parchment. Her single line written in dark ink, "You have seen what we feared to confess." He looked toward the tabernacle. The sanctuary lamp burned brighter than before, a green flame trembling in the glass. He whispered, "Were you guarding the relic, or did it guard you?" No answer came, only a faint rustle above, as the rope of the bells swayed, though there was no wind. That night, he dreamed of 4 women standing beneath the tower. Each held a lantern. Each smiled without moving her lips. When he tried to speak, the sound came out as bells. He woke with the taste of ashes on his tongue and the distant echo of prayer. Father Gabriel awoke before dawn, his body cold despite the blanket. The sound that had pulled him from sleep was not the bell, not the wind, it was whispering. Soft, layered voices moving through the floorboards beneath his room. Not one voice, but 4. He rose, heart thudding, and lit a candle. The voices faded the moment the flame caught. He waited, listening. Nothing, only the creak of wood and the faint ticking of the chapel clock. He descended the stairs slowly. The chapel was dark except for the green flame of the sanctuary lamp. The smell of lilies and wax filled the air. When he approached the altar, he saw it, the confessional door half open again. He stepped closer. From within came a sigh, faint, human. "Who's there?" His voice echoed, sharp against the stone. No answer. He touched the curtain and drew it aside. The seat was empty, but something new lay there. The small metal box, the same he had found underground. He had left it sealed in his study, yet now it rested on the confessional's bench. The wax seal was broken. Inside, the relic glowed faintly. The bone itself seemed to breathe, a subtle expansion and contraction like the chest of a sleeping body. Gabriel stumbled backward. The candle flickered, and the flame bent toward the box, as though drawn by invisible breath. He fell to his knees. "Lord, if this is your will, reveal it gently." The answer came not in words but in sound, a faint chime, a single bell note that hung in the air far longer than any metal could sustain. Then another, higher, softer, followed by a whisper so close it brushed his ear. "Help us." He turned, but no one stood behind him. Only the statues of the saints, their painted eyes dull in the half-light. He closed the box and wrapped it in his cloak. But as he carried it toward the sacristy, the chapel filled with a scent of burning wax and the echo of steps on stone. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere, like rain beneath the floor. He set the box on the altar. "Show me what you want," he whispered. The candles flared. 4 flames rose higher, bending toward one another until they formed a single column of light. Within it, for an instant, he saw faces, the faces of the 4 sisters, calm, radiant, unafraid. Then the light collapsed, leaving smoke and silence. Gabriel fell forward, trembling. He felt neither fear nor peace, only a weight, ancient and sorrowful, pressing through the air. When the smoke cleared, something remained on the altar that had not been there before. 4 rosaries, perfectly aligned, their metal crosses bright as if newly polished. Beneath them, a note in the same hand as the journal. "We were not taken. We were called." He sank into the pew. "Called by what?" The bell tower answered. 1 toll, then 4, then silence again. Outside, the wind stirred the cypress trees. The fog had returned, thick and low, swallowing the garden walls. He carried the relic back to his room and placed it on the desk. He tried to pray but could not. His words slid away from meaning, dissolving into breath. That night, he dreamed again. The same 4 figures stood at the edge of the forest. Their faces were turned toward him. Behind them, the chapel burned with golden light. Lucia stepped forward and spoke, though her lips did not move. "Do not let them seal it again. The relic is not ours. It listens." He woke with tears on his face and the relic glowing faintly in the dark. By morning, the relic's glow was gone, replaced by a cold sheen of condensation. Father Gabriel wrapped it once more in linen and placed it inside the desk drawer. Yet, as the day stretched forward, a tremor of unease stayed in him. The air of Santa Aurelia felt different now, charged, alert. Even the silence seemed to wait for something. He sent a letter to the diocese. Uncatalogued artifact discovered under confessional possible relic. Further instruction requested. He omitted the strange light, the voices, the scent of lilies that now clung to every surface. Days passed. No reply. He busied himself with small repairs, the window hinges, the altar cloth, the broken bell rope. Each night, though, when he extinguished the last candle, he sensed that he was not alone. Footsteps paused just beyond the chapel doors, and a breath of colder air slid across his neck. At dusk on the 5th night, A black car wound up the mountain road. Two men stepped out, both in cassocks, their collars crisp as paper. One introduced himself as Monsignor Valli from the Vatican archives. The other did not give his name. "Where is the object?" Valli asked without greeting. Gabriel led them to his study, his pulse steadying through habit. The Monsignor opened the drawer, unwrapped the cloth, and stared at the fragment of bone as if recognizing it. "You were never meant to find this," he said quietly. "Do you know what it is?" "A relic," Gabriel answered. "But it breathes." The unnamed man looked up sharply. "It what?" Gabriel told them of the sounds, the lights, the writing that appeared in the confessional. He expected disbelief, even laughter. Instead, both men listened in silence, exchanging only one glance, a look of weary acknowledgement. Finally, Valli sighed. "It is not the relic itself that matters, Father. It is what it was buried to contain. Some holiness is too near to fire." "What happened to the sisters?" Gabriel asked. "Were they guarding it?" The Monsignor hesitated. "They were guarding you." He gathered the relic and wrapped it in black velvet. "This will return to Rome. No record will remain here." Gabriel stepped forward. "You can't just erase them again." Valli's eyes softened. "Erasure is mercy." They left before nightfall, their car disappearing into the mist. The sound of tires faded, leaving only the pulse of rain. Gabriel stood alone in the chapel. The altar looked smaller, the air heavier. He felt as if something vital had been pulled from the room, like breath from a body. That night, he found a new letter on his desk. No seal, no handwriting, just his name typed on the front. Inside, a single sentence. "The relic is safe. Do not speak of what you saw." He tore it in half. "And if silence is a lie," he whispered. The reply came not from the letter, but from the chapel below, a faint bell tone clear as glass. He descended the stairs. The candles had lit themselves, 4 of them. Their flames swayed toward the crucifix, the wax pooling like tears. On the altar lay a folded scrap of paper. He unfolded it with shaking hands. "You have obeyed enough. Now believe." No signature, but he knew the handwriting. Sister Lucia. Gabriel knelt. "If I am to believe, then show me." The chapel brightened. The walls shimmered as if drenched in water. And then, in that wavering light, he saw them, 4 figures clothed in grey habits, faces calm, hands clasped in prayer. They stood where the pews had been, eyes fixed on the cross. Lucia stepped forward, her expression neither joy nor sorrow. "We never left," she said. "We were changed. The relic is not lost. It lives wherever faith remembers." He reached out, but the image dissolved into smoke. The candles dimmed. The chapel was empty again. He wept openly for the first time in years. "Lord," he said, "was this your justice or your mercy?" The only answer was the sound of rain on the roof, gentle, rhythmic, like the turning of beads on an unseen rosary. Morning crept into the valley with a light as thin as paper. Mist hung low over the olive trees, softening everything it touched. Father Gabriel stood before the chapel window and watched the fog curl around the bell tower. It looked peaceful from the outside, too peaceful for what the stones remembered. The Vatican car never returned. No one came to collect reports or offer explanations. The diocese quietly reassigned him to another parish, but he lingered for a week, unable to leave. Santa Aurelia had become a wound that refused to close. He spent those last days in silence. No sweeping, no repairs, no letters, only prayer, though his prayers no longer asked for answers. They were small, broken words, like fragments of the Psalms he'd forgotten. "Teach me your paths. Show me your mercy." One afternoon, while packing his few belongings, he found the purple cord again, the one that had bound the scapulars. It had tightened on its own, the knots drawn close, as if someone had pulled from the other end. He carried it to the chapel and laid it across the altar. The air there felt warmer than the rest of the building. The candles had long since burned down, yet the scent of wax lingered. He touched the stone floor. It vibrated faintly, a heartbeat inside the earth. He thought of the relic, of the sisters who had vanished into their calling, of all the faith that lives unseen beneath the weight of silence. He knelt. "If they guard it still," he whispered, "let them rest." The silence deepened. Then from the bell tower above, One single note rang, a clear, perfect tone that hung in the air long after its echo should have died. Another followed, then two more, 4 in total. Gabriel lifted his eyes. Elena, Marta, Agnes, Lucia. He spoke their names like a benediction. He rose and opened the chapel door. Outside, the fog stirred. At the edge of the forest, faint lights glimmered. 4 lanterns, moving slowly through the mist, their glow steady and rhythmic, as if guided by unseen hands. He stepped forward until the cold touched his skin, but the lights receded deeper among the trees, neither inviting nor fleeing, simply continuing their path. He stood there for a long time. The air carried the scent of lilies again. Somewhere behind him, a candle flared to life without touch. He turned back, and for an instant through the doorway, he saw the chapel filled with golden light, every crack in the wall shining like threads of glass. The statues seemed alive, eyes bright, lips half-parted in prayer. Then the light faded, leaving only the quiet and the lingering warmth of something unseen. That evening, he locked the chapel one last time. On the door, he pinned a note written in his own hand. Light entered where faith had once fled. He descended the hill as darkness folded over the valley. The path was lined with cypress trees whispering in the wind. When he reached the last bend, he looked back. The bell tower stood against the dying sky, its cross catching the final sliver of sunlight. For a moment, it looked as if the entire building breathed. The following spring, a new priest arrived to reopen the parish. He found the chapel clean, the altar simple, the air filled with a faint perfume of wax and wildflowers. In the ledger, the final entry in Father Gabriel's hand read, "The silence was not empty. It was listening." Years later, villagers still tell the story. On fog nights when the moon is hidden, 4 lanterns are seen moving along the ridge above Santa Aurelia. Some call it haunting, others prayer. The old say it is the sisters keeping vigil, guarding the relic buried deep within the hill. None dare follow them, yet all who have watched say that the bells sometimes ring softly afterward, as if the mountain itself were remembering. Faith has its own kind of echo. Sometimes it answers long after the question has been asked. And in the heart of that forgotten chapel, under layers of dust and grace, the silence remains. Not empty, not fearful, alive. If this story moved you, comment "Faith Remains." Share it with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for more Bible stories and mysteries.